All right. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video. Don't worry about Lecture 8. It'll come to you here maybe tomorrow or by Friday. I've gotten behind on some things, but not a big deal. Here's the question of the day. The question of the day kind of surrounds some of the residents in North Minneapolis who are now suing city council members based upon the rise of violence that's going on in North Minneapolis, supposedly. These I don't know if it's factual or not. Number one, you can sue anyone at any given time for any reason. As for winning the case or it being viable, not always the case. So my question is kind of a twofold question. Number one, it has to do with, when the whole entire issue took place with George Floyd, not a good thing, number one. City council was like, I think we need to have change, and change can and should include disfunding the police. Now, if you don't understand what disfunding the police is, you need to stop, take a look at that, because it doesn't mean disbanding, right? So disbanding and disfunding aren't the same thing, right? So we're not talking about getting rid of cops. We're talking about putting the funding in other avenues and in other sections of the city, as in more social workers, more psychologists, more mental health specialists, so on and so on and so on. The threat, right, just the threat of the city council saying that they were going to vote to do so, those that were on the other side of the fence said, if you do this, crime is going to increase, right? You decrease law enforcement in neighborhoods, and what will happen is you'll have an increase in crime. The individuals or community members in North Minneapolis are now suing the city council based upon the idea of crime rising, right? So the first question is, do you think that the residents in North Minneapolis have a viable case, right? Is there enough evidence there to say that there's been malpractice on city council and they are liable for the crime that's taking place? Is Minneapolis PD at fault, whether they are doing it directly or indirectly, slowing down work on purpose, not answering calls on purpose? Don't know. Can they also be sued for higher crime in particular neighborhoods? So we're going right back to some of the earlier questions, but I saw this the other day and I thought, this is interesting. I wonder how my students will respond to, is there any kind of libel responsibility on Minneapolis or city council based upon there being an increase in crime? So that's kind of the first part of the question. You can answer the first part or you can engage in the second part. The second part of this question also reverts back to some of the questions that I had before, but I want you to create, or you can address the question like this. If there were no more police officers in the city of Minneapolis, what would be a viable system in place that you could put in front of, or you could replace Minneapolis law enforcement? So if you think private law enforcement is the answer, if you think keeping just a SWAT team and then the rest of individuals being unarmed, but I'm curious on what's the solution to the problem of law enforcement. And here are some answers that aren't acceptable for this type of a question. Number one, if you're like, the city needs to change, people in the neighborhood need to change, crime needs to be lowered, you need to have less people doing less bad things, we already get that. So you can't answer the question by saying, we don't need to change law enforcement, we need to change the criminal element in the neighborhood. I believe that's already the case, right? We need to have less crime in our neighborhoods. We need less people doing less bad things. I'm more curious about how you would answer the question, if there's no more Minneapolis Police Department, then what do we do to stifle reduce and stigmatize crime? So there's the question of the day, or two questions of the day. You're going to take the first part or the second part, or address them both. Peace.